July 1989, Oak Ridge, Oregon. A family's home looked like time had simply stopped. 4 plates on the table. A chicken left raw on the counter. A Walkman still playing softly in the corner. The kids' bikes scattered outside as if they'd dropped them mid-ride. But inside the house there was only silence. No forced entry. No signs of a struggle. The family car still parked in the driveway. And the Walkers, Mark, Linda, 14-year-old Heather, and 9-year-old Cody, were gone. To this day, not a single trace has ever been found. This is the story of a family of 4 who vanished from their home on a quiet summer night, leaving behind dinner on the counter, cars in the driveway, and questions that remain unanswered more than 3 decades later. Before we begin, make sure you subscribe, hit the notification bell, and tell us where you're watching from. It really helps us bring more of these haunting unsolved mysteries to you. Oak Ridge, Oregon, 1989. A timber town tucked deep in the Cascade Mountains. Back then, Oak Ridge had a population of just over 3,000. Logging trucks rumbled down Main Street, the sawmill still employed hundreds of men, and kids played baseball on the high school's cracked asphalt field. Life was predictable, almost painfully ordinary. Among the families living on the outskirts of town were the Walkers, Mark, his wife, Linda, and their 2 children, 14-year-old Heather and 9-year-old Cody. They lived on Miller Creek Road, about 15 minutes outside Oak Ridge, in a modest 2-story home with green shutters and a wide porch. Neighbors described them as private but polite. Mark was a mechanic at a local auto shop. Linda worked part-time at the town library. Heather was on the school track team. Cody was obsessed with fishing in the creek that wound behind their property. On the surface, the Walkers were just another small-town family. But the night of July 15, 1989, their lives, and Oak Ridge itself, would change forever. The last confirmed sighting of the Walker family came earlier that Saturday afternoon. Around 2:30 p.m., Heather and Cody rode their bikes to the Oak Ridge General Store. They bought sodas, a bag of pretzels, and a fishing lure. The clerk, who knew them well, later recalled nothing unusual. They seemed happy, just normal kids. Heather teased her brother about how he'd never catch anything with that lure. Back at the house, Linda was preparing dinner, roast chicken and green beans, according to groceries found later in the kitchen. Mark had spent part of the morning tinkering with his pickup truck, something he often did on weekends. By all accounts, it was a routine Saturday. Yet by the next morning, the house would be silent, the food untouched, and the Walkers gone. The discovery began with concern from Linda's older sister, Carol, who lived 2 towns over in Lowell. Carol called the Walker home Sunday morning to confirm plans for a family barbecue. The phone rang endlessly, no answer. Carol assumed they'd stepped out. She called again in the afternoon. Still nothing. By evening, Carol grew uneasy. The Walkers weren't the type to simply disappear, especially without telling anyone. At around 8:45 p.m., she drove the 20 miles to Oak Ridge. What she found when she pulled up to the house unsettled her instantly. Mark's truck was parked in the driveway, alongside Linda's Oldsmobile. The kids' bikes lay near the porch, toppled as if abandoned mid-play. The front door was slightly open, something Linda never allowed. Inside, the house felt frozen in time. Plates and silverware were laid out on the kitchen table. A roasting pan sat on the counter, raw chicken seasoned but uncooked. Heather's Walkman was plugged into the wall, a cassette still inside. Cody's fishing rod leaned against the back door, as though he had been planning to head out to the creek. But the family was nowhere to be found. At 10:15 p.m., Carol called the Oak Ridge Police Department. Officers arrived within half an hour. They noted no immediate signs of forced entry or violence. The back door was locked from the inside. All windows intact. Nothing appeared stolen. The family's wallets and purses remained inside the house. Yet there were troubling details. Heather's shoes were by the door, suggesting she hadn't planned to go far. Cody's pajamas were laid out on his bed, as though he had intended to change into them that night. Even more unsettling, Linda's wristwatch, something she reportedly never took off, was sitting on the bathroom counter. By midnight, police had taped off the home as a potential crime scene. In the coming days, Oak Ridge would be shaken by the sudden disappearance. Flyers with the family's photographs were taped to store windows and gas pumps. Search parties combed the woods and creek beds around Miller Creek Road. Helicopters circled overhead. But no trace was found. No footprints leading into the forest, no broken branches, no tire marks suggesting the family had been taken by vehicle. It was as though the Walkers had simply stepped out of their home and vanished into thin air. Yet as investigators dug deeper, they began uncovering unsettling details that suggested the family's life was not as ordinary as it seemed. First, there were the phone records. On the Friday before the disappearance, a call had been placed from the Walker home to a number in Portland, lasting nearly 20 minutes. When traced, the number belonged to a motel, one often used for short stays and rarely by families. Who made that call and why remains unclear. Then there was Mark's workplace. His employer later told detectives that Mark had been unusually distracted in the weeks leading up to July 15th. He mentioned having to deal with something from the past, but wouldn't elaborate. And finally, there was the neighbor across the road who swore he saw the Walker family's porch light flick on at around 11 p.m. that Saturday night, hours after Carol believed the family was already gone. What happened between the last mundane errands of that Saturday afternoon and the eerie silence that Carol found the next day? Why were their belongings still in place, meals half prepared, and both vehicles untouched? And perhaps most disturbingly, if the Walkers left voluntarily, why did they never come back? This was only the beginning of a case that would spiral into strange theories, disputed evidence, and lingering suspicions that divide Oak Ridge to this day. In any missing persons case, investigators stress the importance of the first 2 days. What happens, or doesn't happen, in those initial hours can determine whether a case is ever solved. For the Walkers, those first 48 hours were confusing, chaotic, and riddled with decisions that would later be criticized. When Oak Ridge police first responded on the night of July 16th, they treated the scene with a sense of urgency, but not alarm. The lead officer on duty, Sergeant David Mason, later admitted he initially suspected the Walkers might have gone camping. It wasn't unusual for families in Oak Ridge to take off into the Cascades for a weekend without warning, especially in the summer. But as more details came to light, that theory unraveled. The family's wallets and purses were still inside the home. Their clothing, toiletries, and camping gear were untouched. And most importantly, both vehicles sat in the driveway. By dawn on Monday, July 17th, the Oak Ridge Police Department escalated the case. What had started as a welfare check was now classified as a missing persons investigation involving an entire family. The search began with the areas closest to the Walker home. Deputies on horseback traced trails through the dense forest, while volunteers and bloodhounds scoured the banks of Miller Creek. Helicopters circled overhead, scanning for any sign of a vehicle or campsite. Yet despite the effort, there was nothing. No footprints in the mud, no broken tree branches suggesting movement, no discarded belongings. The silence was suffocating. It was like they just walked off the face of the earth, one volunteer recalled. On the second day, authorities expanded the search to logging roads stretching miles into the mountains. Still no trace. The family's Oldsmobile and pickup truck hadn't moved an inch. While the search played out across Oak Ridge, detectives carefully processed the Walker home. The kitchen table remained set for dinner, plates, silverware, even a pitcher of iced tea that had since gone warm. The chicken in the roasting pan had begun to spoil. To investigators, it looked as though Linda had been preparing a meal when something interrupted the family. Heather's Walkman was plugged in by the couch, the cassette halfway through a Whitney Houston song. Cody's homework binder sat open on the dining table. Linda's purse was still on a chair, with her driver's license and bank cards inside. Mark's work boots were by the back door, dust from the auto shop still clinging to them. The only signs of motion were small, almost unsettling in their ordinariness. A half-finished crossword puzzle on the coffee table, a glass of water on the nightstand upstairs, Linda's wristwatch in the bathroom. For detectives, the scene was chilling because it wasn't dramatic. No struggle, no broken windows, no blood. Just a family home that felt like its occupants had evaporated mid-sentence. News of the disappearance spread quickly through Oak Ridge. In a small town, everyone knows everyone. Heather had friends on the track team who were suddenly without their teammate. Cody's absence from Little League practice was noticed immediately. By Tuesday, the town organized volunteer search parties. Residents taped missing posters on the post office board and outside the diner. At the gas station, the walkers' faces stared back at customers from photocopied flyers. Rumors spread just as quickly. Some whispered that Mark might have been in trouble with someone from his past. Others wondered if the family had staged their disappearance. A few believed something sinister had happened inside that house, something the police weren't telling the public. Theories thrived in the absence of answers. Detectives began building a timeline. The last confirmed sighting of the walkers was 2:30 p.m. Saturday, when Heather and Cody bought snacks at the general store. The clerk recalled nothing unusual. From there, everything became speculation. One neighbor told police she thought she saw the Walker children riding bikes around 5 p.m. Another swore she heard a car door slam around 9:30 that night, though she couldn't say which driveway it came from. And then there was the report of the porch light flicking on around 11 p.m., a detail that seemed to clash with the family's apparent disappearance before dinner. With no clear timeline, investigators turned to the phone records. The call from the Walker home to a Portland motel 2 nights before the disappearance puzzled detectives. It lasted nearly 20 minutes. The motel clerk didn't recall the name Walker, nor did he remember a man, woman, or family matching their description. But the record was undeniable. Someone in the Walker home dialed that number. Detectives pressed friends and relatives about whether Mark or Linda had connections to Portland. Carol, Linda's sister, insisted her sibling rarely traveled outside Lane County. Mark, however, had once lived in Portland briefly during his early 20s before meeting Linda. Could the call have been related to him? Investigators contacted Portland police, who sent officers to canvass the motel. They found little, just vague recollections of a man in his 40s checking in that week, paying cash and staying only one night. No name, no paper trail. It was a frustrating lead, tantalizing but inconclusive. Attention soon shifted to Mark himself. As detectives dug into his background, they learned he had a juvenile record sealed from the public. While most of the details remained off-limits, whispers spread among investigators that Mark had once been questioned, though never charged, in connection with a burglary in Eugene during the early 1970s. Co-workers at the auto shop described him as reliable but distant in recent weeks. One recalled Mark mentioning he was dealing with something from the past, and that it wasn't going away. He never explained further. Could that mysterious past have caught up with him? Or was this another red herring? Detectives also examined Linda's background. She had no criminal record, no known enemies. Friends described her as quiet, bookish, and devoted to her children. But one curious detail emerged. About a month before the disappearance, Linda had withdrawn $1,000 in cash from the family's joint savings account. When asked, Carol said Linda never mentioned what the money was for. Police never found the cash in the home. To investigators, this suggested Linda might have been planning for something, or someone, outside her daily routine. As word of the disappearance spread, more potential witnesses came forward. Some were credible, others less so. One man claimed he saw a blue van parked near Miller Creek Road around 10 p.m. on the night the walkers vanished. Another insisted he saw a woman resembling Linda at a rest stop outside Bend 2 days later. A trucker reported spotting a family of 4 walking along Highway 58 near Oak Ridge, but couldn't say for sure it was them. Each lead was investigated and each fizzled out. The van was never found. The rest stop sighting proved unreliable. And the trucker later admitted he couldn't even recall if the family he saw matched the walker's description. The investigation seemed to expand in every direction without moving forward. By the end of July, frustration grew. Reporters from Eugene and Portland descended on Oak Ridge, eager for updates. Headlines dubbed it the Walker Mystery, and speculated whether foul play, abduction, or voluntary disappearance was to blame. For the Oak Ridge Police Department, the scrutiny was intense. They were a small force, unaccustomed to national attention. Critics accused them of mishandling the initial search and of being too slow to involve state or federal agencies. By August, the FBI formally joined the case, treating it as a potential abduction. But without ransom demands, communication from the family, or hard evidence, agents admitted privately they had little to work with. Through all the dead ends, one detail lingered with detectives: the neighbor's account of the porch light switching on at 11 p.m. If true, it suggested someone was inside the Walker home hours after the family was last believed to be seen. But who? Was it the Walkers themselves, alive and moving around the house that night? Or was it someone else, an intruder perhaps, returning to the scene after the fact? The question haunted investigators then, and it haunts the case still today. By the close of the second week, the investigation had stalled. Search parties found no trace in the forest. Witness reports dissolved under scrutiny. The family's vehicles sat untouched. And inside the Walker home, time felt frozen, every object a reminder of lives interrupted. Yet just as the case seemed to fade, a new development emerged, one that would shift suspicion, fracture the town's trust, and introduce names into the investigation that no one expected. By late summer of 1989, Oak Ridge was no longer just a logging town. It was the town where an entire family had vanished. For some, the mystery became an obsession. For others, it was a shadow that made even ordinary routines feel unsafe. Parents no longer let their kids ride bikes alone. Shopkeepers double-locked their doors at night. Rumors thickened the air at the diner, the post office, even at Little League games. Was the Walker family abducted? Did they flee voluntarily? Or had something far darker taken place inside their home on Miller Creek Road? Theories spread faster than facts, and each one pointed fingers in a different direction. The first major theory was that the Walkers had simply left. On paper, there were reasons to suspect it. Linda's unexplained withdrawal of $1,000 cash weeks before raised eyebrows. The strange motel call to Portland suggested some kind of secret arrangement. And with no signs of struggle inside the home, some detectives argued the family may have chosen to walk away from their life. Supporters of this theory pointed to Mark's increasingly distracted behavior at work. If he had debts, enemies, or a past catching up with him, leaving Oak Ridge might have seemed like the only option. But critics quickly dismantled the idea. If the Walkers left voluntarily, why did they leave behind both vehicles, all their clothing, their IDs, and the children's prized belongings? Heather's track medals and Cody's baseball glove remained in their rooms. To those who knew the family, the idea they'd abandon everything without saying goodbye was unthinkable. Even Linda's sister Carol rejected the theory outright. Linda would never vanish without calling me. She adored her kids. Whatever happened, it wasn't her choice. The second theory was stranger abduction. Oak Ridge sits along Highway 58, a route connecting Eugene to Central Oregon. Long-haul truckers, travelers, and drifters pass through regularly. Could someone have targeted the family at random? Investigators considered the possibility that a passing stranger entered the Walker home late that night. The detail about the porch light switching on around 11 p.m. seemed to fit with the idea of someone moving through the house. Yet again, problems emerged. Both cars remained in the driveway. Forcibly moving 4 people, including 2 children, without neighbors hearing anything would have been nearly impossible. And with no ransom demands or financial motive, it seemed an oddly elaborate crime for a stranger. Still, the FBI kept the theory alive. In 1990, they quietly compared the case to other unsolved disappearances in the Pacific Northwest. Though they never confirmed a link, agents admitted the Walkers' vanishing carried echoes of other highway-related cases. The third theory, and the one that gained the most traction, was that the Walkers disappeared at the hands of someone they knew. Statistics backed it up. Most family disappearances or abductions involved acquaintances. And here, small details pointed toward familiarity. No forced entry. No missing valuables. No defensive wounds or signs of panic. It looked less like an ambush and more like the family left the house willingly, perhaps to meet someone. But who? The first name to emerge was Tom Barrett, a neighbor who lived less than half a mile away. Tom, in his 40s, worked as a logger and was known in town for his temper. He often clashed with Mark over property boundaries, particularly access to Miller Creek, which cut between their lands. Detectives interviewed Barrett twice. He denied any involvement, but his alibi was shaky. On the night of July 15th, Barrett claimed he was home watching television. His wife, however, told police she went to bed early and couldn't confirm his whereabouts after 9 p.m. When questioned about whether he had seen anything unusual, Barrett reportedly said, "That family kept to themselves. You never know what people like that are into." Though never charged, Barrett's proximity, history of disputes, and inconsistent story kept him high on the list of persons of interest. Another name emerged weeks later. Brian Keller, a 28-year-old drifter who had been seen around Oak Ridge earlier that summer. Keller was known to hitch rides and pick up odd jobs in logging towns. Witnesses claimed he'd been at the Oak Ridge General Store in late June, asking about day labor. One woman recalled him staring at Heather Walker as she bought snacks with friends. When Keller was questioned in Portland about unrelated theft charges, police asked about the Walkers. He admitted passing through Oak Ridge but denied knowing the family. Detectives could never place him in town on July 15th, yet the timing of his travels made him impossible to rule out completely. As theories swirled, the case was also marked by potential missteps, pieces of evidence that, in hindsight, may have been overlooked. One example was a set of partial shoe prints found in the dirt near the Walker driveway. At the time, police dismissed them as belonging to search volunteers. But later analysis suggested they were from a size not commonly worn by the family. Another detail was the telephone call log. Though investigators focused on the Portland motel number, there were also 3 short outgoing calls to an unlisted number 2 days before the disappearance. The calls lasted less than a minute each, and the number was traced to a payphone outside a bar in Eugene. Police noted it but never pursued the lead aggressively. And then there was the family dog. Neighbors said the Walker's German Shepherd, Rex, was unusually protective. Yet on the night Carol entered the house, Rex wasn't barking. He was lying on the porch, calm, as though he recognized whoever had last been there. To many that was the most haunting detail of all. As weeks turned into months, investigators also scrutinized the walkers themselves. Mark's "something from the past" comment at work remained unexplained. Could he have owed money? Had he crossed paths with the wrong people years earlier in Portland? Linda's $1,000 cash withdrawal continued to puzzle detectives. Some believed she had been planning to leave. Others suspected the money was payment, either to settle a debt or to someone pressuring the family. And Heather, just 14, was rumored to be growing restless in Oak Ridge. Classmates later admitted she sometimes talked about wanting to move to a bigger city, where things actually happen. Detectives considered whether she might have been in contact with someone older, perhaps someone who promised her an escape. None of these possibilities could be proven, but each painted a portrait of a family carrying quiet burdens. By the fall of 1989, the case had stalled. No arrests, no bodies, no clear suspects. For Oak Ridge, the lack of progress bred suspicion, not just of strangers but of each other. Some whispered that the police weren't telling the full story. Others accused the department of mishandling evidence. At town meetings, residents demanded answers. Why had the shoe prints been disregarded? Why hadn't the FBI followed up on the Eugene payphone calls? Why wasn't Tom Barrett investigated more thoroughly? The silence from investigators only deepened the rift. Then came a rumor that shifted the narrative once again. In October 1989, a logger claimed he overheard a conversation at a bar in Eugene. Two men were allegedly talking about a family up in Oak Ridge that got what was coming to them. When pressed, the logger couldn't identify the men or recall their exact words. Police followed up, interviewing bar staff and patrons, but no one corroborated the account. Still, the rumor spread like wildfire. To many in Oak Ridge, it suggested the walkers hadn't vanished randomly, they had been targeted. By the end of that first year, the Walker case had become more than just a mystery. It was a puzzle with too many pieces and none seemed to fit together. Was it a neighbor with a grudge, a drifter passing through, or something buried deep in the family's own past? And if someone in Oak Ridge truly knew what happened that night, why had they stayed silent for so long? By 1990, the Walker disappearance was no longer just Oak Ridge's tragedy, it had become a story the entire state of Oregon followed. Local papers ran anniversary pieces. Eugene TV stations sent reporters back to Miller Creek Road to film where it all began. National outlets picked up the case briefly, framing it as one of America's strangest family vanishings. For Oak Ridge, the attention was bittersweet. On one hand, it kept the Walkers' faces in the spotlight. On the other, it brought outsiders who speculated wildly, stirring fear without providing answers. And behind the headlines, the investigation itself shifted gears. With no arrests and no hard evidence, the FBI pulled back, leaving Oak Ridge detectives once again in charge of a case already grown cold. For Linda's sister, Carol, the weight of the mystery was unbearable. She became the family's spokesperson, giving interviews, organizing vigils, and pleading for tips. Every holiday season, she placed a candle in her window, telling reporters it was a light for Linda and the kids, so they know they can come home. But the pressure fractured relationships too. Some relatives believed the Walkers were still alive somewhere. Others believed they had been murdered. Disagreements over how to handle the search, whether to hire private investigators, whether to keep cooperating with Oak Ridge police, strained once close family bonds. For Carol, each year that passed without answers only deepened her resolve. But privately, she admitted to friends that she feared the truth was something she might not want to know. In May 1990, hope surged briefly when a truck driver reported seeing a woman and two children resembling Linda, Heather, and Cody at a truck stop near Medford, Oregon. The driver claimed the woman appeared nervous, glancing around as though being watched. The children, he said, seemed tired but unharmed. Police rushed to the location, but by the time they arrived, the group was gone. Security cameras from the truck stop were grainy and inconclusive. The tip generated national headlines, "Walker family spotted?" But within weeks, investigators ruled it unverifiable. To some, it was a cruel false alarm. To others, it fueled belief that the Walkers were out there, alive, hidden against their will. Later that year, a discovery sent shockwaves through Oak Ridge. Hikers near Willamette National Forest stumbled upon skeletal remains scattered in a shallow ravine. For a tense week, the town braced for confirmation that the Walkers had finally been found. But forensic analysis crushed that expectation. The remains belonged to a single adult male, unrelated to the family. The man was later identified as a missing drifter from California. The discovery did nothing to solve the case, but it reinforced Oak Ridge's unease. If an unidentified man could lie in the woods for years unnoticed, what did that mean for the Walkers? In 1991, Oak Ridge police received 2 anonymous letters. Both were handwritten, postmarked from Portland, and each claimed to know what happened to the Walker family. The first letter accused Mark Walker of double-crossing the wrong people. The second suggested Linda had been planning to leave with the children, and that someone made sure she couldn't. Handwriting analysis proved inconclusive. The letters contained no specific details only an insider would know. Detectives suspected they were hoaxes, but they couldn't ignore them entirely. For Carol, the letters were torment. She begged detectives to release them publicly, hoping someone might recognize the handwriting. Police refused, citing the risk of copycats. To this day, the source of those letters remains unknown. By the mid-1990s, suspicion began shifting back toward Oak Ridge itself. Detectives revisited neighbors, coworkers, and anyone with a potential link to the family. Tom Barrett, the neighbor with the property disputes, remained on the radar. He eventually moved out of Oak Ridge in 1993, reportedly after constant harassment from townspeople convinced he was guilty. He never faced charges. Another name surfaced, a local handyman named Eric Vaughn, who had occasionally worked on the Walker home. Vaughn had a prior conviction for assault and a reputation for unpredictability. When questioned, he denied involvement and provided an alibi. He claimed he was visiting relatives in Idaho the weekend of the disappearance. Police verified parts of his story, but gaps remained. Though never charged, Vaughn's name lingered in the rumor mill, adding to the list of half-answers that frustrated the town. By the mid-90s, true crime television was booming. Shows like Unsolved Mysteries highlighted cases of missing families, and Oak Ridge's tragedy seemed a perfect candidate. Producers reached out, but Oak Ridge police resisted, worried about sensationalism. Carol, however, wanted the exposure. If it takes national TV to bring them home, then so be it, she argued. Eventually, in 1996, the Walker's story aired in a regional documentary. It reignited attention, drawing dozens of new tips. Unfortunately, most were dead ends, sightings of families in grocery stores, mistaken identities at airports, vague claims that someone knew something. Each tip was a reminder of how fragile hope could be. By the late 90s, the case had no shortage of theories. Some speculated Mark had cooperated with law enforcement years earlier and the family had been relocated. Authorities firmly denied this. Others whispered about an obscure religious sect rumored to operate in rural Oregon. No evidence ever supported it, but the idea persisted. A darker theory suggested Mark may have killed his family and himself, their remains hidden deep in the woods. Investigators found no proof. Each theory reflected both desperation and the human need to explain the unexplainable. By 2011, years had passed. Oak Ridge had changed. The sawmill closed, families moved away, and new residents arrived who had no memory of the Walkers. For those who remained, the mystery never left. The empty Walker house on Miller Creek Road became a landmark of unease. Eventually sold, remodeled, and occupied by new owners, it still carried a reputation. Neighbors whispered about hearing strange noises at night, though rational minds chalked it up to the house's history haunting imaginations. For Carol, the fight continued. She attended every anniversary vigil, even when attendance dwindled. "I promised Linda I'd look out for her kids," she told reporters. "I can't stop now, not until I know." Over time, critics dissected the early investigation. Why hadn't the shoe prints near the driveway been preserved better? Why hadn't detectives pursued the Eugene payphone calls more aggressively? Why had the neighbor's porch light account been treated as secondary? Former officers admitted mistakes. "We were a small department, overwhelmed," one said years later. "We did the best we could, but looking back I know we missed things." For families of the missing, those words offered little comfort. In July 1999, the 10-year anniversary brought renewed attention. Candlelight vigils filled the town square. Local pastors urged the community not to forget. But even then the questions outweighed the answers. Were the Walkers still alive, hiding somewhere far from Oak Ridge? Were they buried in an unmarked grave in the Oregon wilderness? Or had someone, perhaps even someone still living in town, silenced them forever? By the end of the decade, the Walker disappearance had shifted from urgent investigation to unsolved legend. Leads went cold, suspects faded from memory, and Oak Ridge learned to live with absence. But just as the case seemed destined to fade into history, the new millennium brought a discovery, one that pulled the Walkers' names back into the headlines and reopened wounds many thought had scarred over. By the early 2000s, advances in forensic science were changing the way cold cases were investigated. DNA technology, once in its infancy, was now mainstream. Old evidence boxes across the country were being reopened, tested, and in some cases finally yielding answers. For Oak Ridge detectives, the Walker case seemed like a natural candidate for re-examination. The family's disappearance had haunted the town for over a decade. And though evidence had been scarce, the few items collected in 1989 were still preserved in the Lane County storage facility. So in 2001, 12 years after the Walkers vanished, investigators pulled those boxes back into the light. Among the items reanalyzed were partial shoe prints near the Walker driveway, long dismissed as search party contamination. A glass of water from the nightstand, preserved in a sealed container. The phone records, including the motel call and the unlisted Eugene payphone connections. Fibers collected from the family sofa, where it appeared someone had sat recently the night of the disappearance. DNA testing on the glass of water proved inconclusive. It had degraded too much over the years. But the fibers revealed something strange. Mixed in with ordinary household material was a fragment of carpet fiber not consistent with the Walker home. Investigators traced it to a brand used in vehicles during the 1980s. It wasn't a breakthrough, but it hinted at the possibility of an outsider inside the house that night. Leading the renewed investigation was Detective Sarah McConnell, a rising figure in the Lane County Sheriff's Office. McConnell was known for her persistence on cold cases, often re-interviewing witnesses others had long written off. She began by revisiting the Walker timeline. Her team re-interviewed store clerks, neighbors, and relatives. Many details had blurred over the years, but some memories remained sharp. One neighbor now recalled hearing not just a car door on the night of July 15th, but an actual vehicle driving off around 10 p.m. Another swore she saw a man standing near the Walker mailbox earlier that evening, though she hadn't reported it at the time. For McConnell, these accounts suggested the walkers may not have simply vanished silently. Someone may have been watching. With the timeline reopened, familiar names resurfaced. Tom Barrett, the neighbor with the land dispute, was now living in Idaho. McConnell tracked him down and questioned him again. Barrett stuck to his old story, claiming he was home watching TV that night. But when pressed on why he had moved so suddenly in 1993, he grew defensive. "People wouldn't leave me alone," he said. "I didn't kill nobody. I just wanted peace." Though he remained a person of interest, there was still no hard evidence tying him to the walkers. Eric Vaughn, the handyman, was also revisited. He had aged badly, battling alcoholism and unemployment. McConnell noted inconsistencies in his alibi, gaps in the timeline that couldn't be verified. Vaughn grew agitated in interviews, at one point snapping, "Why do you people keep coming back? They're gone. Leave it alone." Though suspicious, Vaughn denied involvement to his death in 2005. McConnell also reanalyzed the mysterious phone calls. The motel number in Portland remained frustratingly vague. But the 3 short calls to the Eugene payphone caught her attention. She learned that in 1989, the bar next to the payphone was a hangout spot for transient workers. She tracked down former employees, one of whom vaguely remembered a man who used to talk about a family in Oak Ridge he didn't trust. The memory was too foggy to confirm anything. Still, it added weight to the theory that the walker's disappearance might not have been entirely random. In 2003, a seemingly unrelated traffic stop changed everything. Police in Bend, Oregon, arrested a man named Kevin Dwyer on charges of possession of stolen goods. During questioning, Dwyer bragged about his past, including knowing what really happened to that Walker family back in the day. Detectives immediately flagged the statement. Under pressure, Dwyer backtracked, claiming he was only repeating bar talk. But investigators searched his vehicle and home, uncovering an old map of Lane County with a circle drawn around the area near Miller Creek Road. The discovery was enough to make Dwyer a serious suspect. Kevin Dwyer, 42 at the time of his arrest, had a long record of petty crime and assault. He'd spent time in Oak Ridge in the late 80s, working short stints in logging camps. Former acquaintances, but Dwyer denied involvement. Forensic searches of his belongings found no direct connection to the walkers. The carpet fibers from the Walker home couldn't be matched conclusively to any of his old vehicles. After months of investigation, prosecutors admitted they lacked the evidence to charge him. Dwyer was released, though he remained on detectives' radar for years. For Carol, hearing about Dwyer was a gut punch. At first, she felt certain he was the one responsible. When no charges followed, her grief deepened. "Every time there's a new name, it's like losing them all over again," she said in a 2004 interview. The roller coaster of hope and disappointment was a pattern repeated throughout the 2000s. Each lead seemed promising, each suspect convincing, but none ever resulted in answers. By the late 2000s, cold case investigators began experimenting with new forensic techniques. Touch DNA, soil analysis, digital archiving. McConnell pushed to have every Walker item retested with the latest methods. In 2008, one result caught her attention. Trace DNA was recovered from the rim of the water glass left on the nightstand. It was partial and degraded, but it did not match any member of the Walker family. For McConnell, this was the first hard evidence suggesting someone else had been inside the house. The DNA was uploaded to CODIS, the national database. No match was found. Still, it was enough to breathe life into a case many thought had gone cold forever. By the time the 20th anniversary arrived in 2009, Oak Ridge had changed again. New businesses had opened, new families moved in. But the Walker case remained the town's defining scar. The anniversary vigil drew one of the largest crowds in years. Former classmates of Heather now brought their own children, telling them the story of the family that never came home. Reporters asked Detective McConnell if she believed the Walkers were still alive. She paused before answering, "I believe someone out there knows exactly what happened. And I believe they've carried that secret far too long." 2 decades after the Walkers vanished, there was still no body, no confirmed suspect, and no resolution. But the discovery of foreign DNA in their home raised chilling new questions. Who had been inside the Walker house that night? Why had they left without a trace? And would the truth ever emerge, or would it remain one of Oregon's darkest unsolved mysteries? By the 2010s, true crime had shifted from late-night television to the internet. Podcasts, online forums, and social media breathed new life into cold cases once relegated to dusty evidence boxes. The Walker family disappearance was tailor-made for this new wave. In 2013, a popular podcast devoted an entire 3-part series to the case, piecing together old timelines and speculating on the theories. It drew thousands of listeners, many of whom had never even heard of Oak Ridge before. Suddenly, the Walkers weren't just a local mystery, they were a national talking point again. Podcast hosts and amateur sleuths latched onto overlooked details. The porch light at 11 p.m. was it proof the family was still alive that night, or evidence of an intruder returning? The dog's calm demeanor. Did Rex know the person who entered the house? The Portland motel call. Was Mark arranging a secret meeting, or was someone else using their phone? The partial DNA on the glass. Was it the intruder's trace, or simply an innocent visitor from earlier that week? These questions fueled endless debates online. Some argued the Walkers had been abducted by someone they trusted. Others insisted it was a case of voluntary disappearance gone wrong. In Oak Ridge, the renewed attention reopened old wounds. For longtime residents, the case was not entertainment, it was a scar that never healed. In 2014, Oak Ridge marked 25 years since the disappearance. A memorial service drew survivors, classmates, and relatives who still clung to hope. Carol, now older but no less determined, stood before the crowd with a candle in hand. "We've lived half our lives without them," she said. "But I still believe someone out there knows the truth. And I pray they find the courage to come forward." Her words made the evening news, once again propelling the Walkers' names into the spotlight. With the rise of Facebook groups and online sleuthing communities, new witnesses began to emerge. In 2016, a woman in Washington claimed she had seen Heather in a grocery store years earlier. Another insisted Cody had been a classmate under a different name in Montana. None of these claims held up to scrutiny. But the volume of tips demonstrated something powerful. Decades later, people still cared. The mystery of the Walkers had transcended Oak Ridge. It had become a symbol of the unresolved. In 2017, investigators quietly revisited a name long buried in the case file. Kevin Dwyer, the drifter who had once bragged about knowing what happened. This time, the revisit wasn't about him directly, it was about his former associates. Detectives discovered that Dwyer had traveled in circles with 2 other men in the late 80s, both with criminal records for burglary and assault. One had since died in a car accident. The other, still alive and living in Nevada, refused to speak with detectives. The link was tenuous, but it reignited suspicions that the Walkers may have crossed paths with dangerous men who simply hadn't been fully investigated in 1989. Despite the advances of the 2010s, technology could only go so far. The partial DNA from the glass was too degraded for modern genealogical matching. The shoe prints had not been preserved well enough for reliable comparison. Detective Sarah McConnell, who had championed the case since 2001, admitted publicly in 2018 that she feared the physical evidence might never deliver the smoking gun. "We have fragments," she said, But fragments don't solve cases. People do. Her words hinted at what many investigators believed, that the truth about the walkers lay not in the evidence boxes, but in the silence of someone still alive. As the internet dissected every angle, three dominant theories remained. The walkers left voluntarily and met with foul play. Perhaps they intended to start fresh, but encountered violence along the way. Abduction by someone they knew. The lack of forced entry suggested familiarity, possibly a neighbor, a friend, or someone from Mark's past. Targeted crime connected to Mark. Many still believed his vague comments about something from the past were the key. None could be proven. Each had its own flaws. But each carried enough weight to survive 3 decades of scrutiny. By the early 2020s, Carol's health had begun to decline. Still, she remained the most consistent voice for the walkers. She kept their photos framed in her living room, fresh flowers on the mantel, and a stack of clippings in a box by her chair. In her last interview she said, "The hardest part isn't not knowing if they're alive or gone. The hardest part is wondering if someone walks past me in the grocery store every week, knowing exactly what happened and saying nothing." Carol passed away in 2022, never learning the truth. Now, more than 3 decades later, the Walker family remains one of Oregon's longest-standing unsolved mysteries. The house on Miller Creek Road has long since changed hands. The forest trails where search parties once combed are overgrown. Many of the original investigators have retired, some passing away. Yet the case file remains open. Detective McConnell, now close to retirement herself, still calls the Walker disappearance the one that keeps me up at night. The partial DNA sample is preserved, awaiting new breakthroughs in technology. The old phone records sit in a binder, the Portland motel call and Eugene payphone numbers still unexplained. And somewhere, buried in the noise of false tips and faded memories, may lie the answer. For Oak Ridge, the walkers are more than a cold case. They are a reminder of fragility, how an ordinary Saturday can fracture into an eternity of unanswered questions. Every July, a small group gathers with candles at the town square. The crowd has dwindled, but the silence of the vigil is powerful. No one speaks because nothing new can be said. The Walker family is still missing. And until they are found, Oak Ridge will always be a town with a shadow. 30-plus years later, the Walker home stands quiet, its porch light replaced, its walls repainted. But for those who remember, every detail of that July night remains vivid. The chicken left on the counter, the dog lying silently on the porch, the unanswered phone ringing in an empty house. What happened to Mark, Linda, Heather, and Cody Walker? Were they taken by someone they trusted? Did they flee only to meet with violence on the road? Or does the answer lie buried in the silence of Oak Ridge itself, kept by someone who has carried the truth for decades? The Walker family case remains unsolved. And until the day answers come, their story lingers as one of the Pacific Northwest's most haunting mysteries. What do you think happened to the Walkers that night? Share your thoughts below.